right, so this week we're really going deep into Nutstuff, that source that's always making these kind of bold predictions and giving us some pretty out there market analysis.
Yeah, they always seem to be a step ahead, like sniffing out those big market trends before anyone else even notices.
Exactly. So get ready because this deep dive is all about the most surprising market shifts they've spotted in the past week.
And oh boy, they've got some doozies this time. We're talking about the Ukraine war potentially ending, a major shift in power away from the US, and Bitcoin, get this, becoming like a key part of the whole global financial system.
Okay, whoa, whoa, whoa. Let's break that down a bit. Let's start with the Ukraine war. Nutstuff is saying it was like a setup all along with the West deliberately trying to weaken
We're
Russia.
already heavy accusation, right?
Totally. They're even suggesting that Trump is basically orchestrating a peace deal, putting pressure on Zelensky to accept terms that might not be the best for Ukraine.
It's definitely a controversial take. Nutstuff argues that European leaders are totally caught off guard by this sudden push for peace. And they're saying that a deal, even one that, favors Russia, is basically inevitable at this point.
Wow. So if they're right, what does that even mean for, the average investor?
Well, Nutstuff sees this whole thing as a trigger, like a catalyst for this massive realignment of global power. They think the US's dominance is fading and all that capital is going to start flowing back to Europe. And get this, China.
So wait, are they saying we should be like shifting our focus away from those big US tech companies and looking more towards European defense stocks and like Chinese tech?
Exactly. They're highlighting companies like BASF, that big German chemical company, Worldwide, a European airline, and RWE, the German energy giant. They've all seen some pretty impressive gains lately.
Makes sense, I guess, if there's going to be more focus on like European defense.
Right. And of course, they're still all about those Chinese tech giants. Alibaba, JD.com, Tencent, all of them. They think those companies are seriously undervalued compared to their US counterparts.
So what, like whole new world order, a whole new way to invest?
That's what Nutstuff is saying. They think the smart money is going to be looking outside the US for the best opportunities.
Okay, before we move on, let's talk about this mineral deal that Nutstuff keeps mentioning. They're claiming that Trump is using this deal to get his hands on some pretty valuable resources, in exchange for supporting Ukraine.
Right. They're saying it's a way for American companies to get access to key minerals in Ukraine. Could really shake up the global resource market.
They even specifically mentioned this company, Power Nickel, as a potential like winner in this whole deal.
Yeah.
But is it just a smart business move or is there something like more going on?
Nutstuff kind of implies that the U.S. might be using this deal to, like, plant their flag in the region, maybe even as a way to, like, scare off Russia from doing anything else. Yeah, it makes you wonder what's really going on behind the scenes, right? Like, what are the long-term consequences of this whole thing?
For sure. It feels like Nutstuff is saying we need to like toss out our old way of thinking about the world
Yeah.
because they're saying the old rules just don't apply anymore and we need to be ready for some big unexpected changes.
They're definitely shaking things up, that's for sure. But the question is, are they right? I guess we need to keep digging into their analysis and see where it leads.
I'm all for it. Okay, let's switch gears a bit and talk about like their whole investment philosophy. They're huge on investing in companies that like fulfill Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Oh, yeah, that's an interesting one. Basically focusing on businesses that provide like the essentials, the things people always need.
Right, like food, shelter, safety, that sort of thing.
For those who haven't heard of it, Maslow's hierarchy of needs is the psychology theory that ranks human needs, starting with the basic stuff like food and shelter and then going up to like self-actualization and all that.
In Nutstuff, thinks that the companies that operate in these essential sectors, they're the ones that are most likely to, like, weather any economic storm. They're the ones that will keep delivering those consistent returns.
They point to companies like WMX and RSG, those waste management giants. Everyone's got to get rid of their trash. And then there's food industry staples like YM brands. People always got to eat, right? And of course, defense contractors. People want to feel safe, especially when things are uncertain.
Totally. It's like no matter what's happening in the world, people still need to eat, get rid of their garbage, and feel secure.
Exactly. And Nutstuff argues that if you build your portfolio around these core needs, it'll be more resilient, like less likely to get knocked around by all the market ups and downs.
And they're putting their money where their mouth is, right? They claim their own portfolio is actually outperforming the market, even with all the crazy stuff happening lately. It definitely makes you think, especially if you're looking for a more stable and predictable portfolio.
It's worth considering, especially these days. It's a good reminder that sometimes the safest bets are the ones that are meeting our most basic needs.
Okay, ready for another bold claim from Nutstuff? Get this. They're saying Bitcoin is going mainstream. Like, it's not just a speculative asset anymore. It's becoming a crucial part of the global financial infrastructure.
Yeah, that's a pretty big statement. And they're backing it up with some pretty surprising news. Apparently, the Trump administration announced they're creating a strategic Bitcoin reserve.
Hold on, really? A Bitcoin reserve? That's huge. What does Nutstuff think this means for, like, the future of Bitcoin?
Well, they think it's going to set off a chain reaction, like it'll encourage all these institutions to finally jump into the crypto space. They think it could push the price of Bitcoin even higher than it is now.
So they see this move as a sign that governments are, like, finally waking up to the fact that digital assets are here to stay.
Absolutely. And they're pointing out that the US government kind of missed the boat before, like with all that Bitcoin that was seized over the years. They're saying this time they're not going to let the opportunity slip away. And they're not just talking about the US either. Nutstuff suggests that other countries, especially those struggling with things like slow growth and aging populations, they might start exploring similar strategies with Bitcoin.
It's like they're saying, hey, governments, get on board or get left behind.
Exactly. They even have this pretty radical idea for the UK. They suggested allocating a small chunk of national insurance contributions to Bitcoin.
Wow, that's a pretty big idea. They're basically suggesting that governments could, like, use the potential growth of Bitcoin to, tackle some of their biggest financial problems.
Right, like it's time to get creative and adapt, embrace the potential of these digital assets.
Nutstuff is really challenging the status quo here.
Yeah.
It's like they're not just giving investment advice, they're proposing a whole new way to think about money and the economy.
They're definitely pushing the boundaries, that's for sure. But whether you agree with them or not, they definitely make you think about the world differently, don't they?
Absolutely. All right, let's pause here for a sec. I think we need to take a closer look at this whole strategic Bitcoin reserve thing.
Yeah.
Like, what are the pros and cons? Could this really be the thing that pushes Bitcoin into the mainstream?
Yeah, good point. On one hand, having a government-backed Bitcoin reserve, that could definitely make the whole cryptocurrency market seem more legitimate. It could encourage more big investors to get involved, the institutional players.
Right.
And it could potentially stabilize the price of Bitcoin, make it less volatile, which has always been a big worry for people, right?
So instead of this crazy roller coaster ride, it could become more of a steady climb.
Maybe. But there's also the other side of the coin. Some people are worried that if the government gets too involved in the crypto space, it could lead to more regulation and oversight, which could stifle innovation and, mess with the whole decentralized nature of cryptocurrencies.
So it's kind of a double-edged sword.
Yeah, exactly. There are potential upsides and downsides. It's too early to say for sure how it's all going to play out.
Nutstuff sure knows how to spark a debate, that's for sure.
Oh, yeah. They love to challenge what everyone thinks they know and make people see things from a totally different angle.
All right, let's get back to Nutstuff's take on the Ukraine war. They're basically calling out what they see as, like, these mainstream media fables about the whole conflict, especially the idea that Russia is the only bad guy in all this.
Right. They're saying it's way more complicated than that. They're talking about the history and the cultural connections between Russia and Ukraine, especially in places like Donbass and Crimea.
They even go so far as to say that the West has been playing a dangerous game by trying to pull Ukraine into their orbit.
Yeah, it's a controversial viewpoint, but they argue that the West's actions, like supporting the 2014 Maidan Revolution, have directly contributed to the current conflict.
They're not afraid to call out what they see as hypocrisy either, comparing the West, condemning Russia for taking Crimea, to when NATO intervened in Kosovo back in 1999.
Basically, they're saying everyone's got some blame in this whole mess, and the West hasn't always been acting in good faith.
And it's not just the West they're pointing fingers at. Nutstuff is also pretty critical of Zelensky, suggesting that he's more worried about his image and keeping the West happy than actually finding a peaceful solution.
They even question all those billions of dollars in aid going to Ukraine, suggesting a lot of it is just getting lost to corruption.
It's a pretty cynical view, especially given how Zelensky's been portrayed as, like, this hero in the Western media.
Nutstuff definitely likes to go against the grain, and they seem to really enjoy challenging the popular narrative.
So if we're taking Nutstuff's analysis at face value, it sounds like they're saying the Ukraine war is more about these big power struggles and less about, like good versus evil.
Right. They're urging us to look beyond the simple stories we're being told and consider all the complex historical and political factors that led to this conflict.
It's a tough perspective to swallow, but it's important to hear different viewpoints and, get the whole story.
Absolutely. Just blindly accepting one side of the story without questioning it can be pretty dangerous. It's always important to be critical and look for different perspectives.
Okay, let's move on to something else. Nutstuff seems to have a different take on. It's
Yeah.
Europe's role in the world. They're basically saying Europe is becoming less and less important on the global stage, that it's being overshadowed by, the US, China, and Russia.
Yeah, they're pointing to Europe's dependence on Russian gas and their perceived lack of military strength as major weaknesses.
They even say that Europe's focus on social welfare has come at the cost of its, hard power, and now they're paying the price.
It's a pretty grim assessment, but Nutstuff believes that Europe's decline is inevitable unless they make some serious changes.
So what does this mean for investors? What opportunities does Nutstuff see in this shifting world order?
Well, even though they're not too optimistic about Europe's future, they actually are bullish on European defense stocks. They think the war in Ukraine has exposed Europe's vulnerabilities and will lead to them spending way more on defense.
So companies like those we mentioned earlier, BASF, YSZZ, RWE, Leonardo, they could all benefit from this trend.
Exactly. They also see potential in companies that are likely to gain from that mineral deal that Trump is supposedly putting together. They think this deal could give American companies a big advantage when it comes to accessing valuable resources.
And of course, they're still all in on China, arguing that its tech giants are way undervalued and that the country is in a prime position to benefit from this global power shift.
They're highlighting the fact that money is flowing out of Europe and into other markets, and they believe China is one of the main places it's going.
So it sounds like Nutstuff's advice is to look beyond the U.S., consider the rising powers, and be ready for a world where the old rules don't apply anymore.
That's a pretty good summary of their message, yeah. They're encouraging investors to think for themselves, challenge the conventional wisdom, and be ready to adapt to a rapidly changing world.
It's a lot to take in, for sure. But it's always good to hear different perspectives, even if they're a little controversial. It makes us question what we think we know and think critically about the information we're getting.
Absolutely. Just blindly accepting one narrative can be risky. It's
Yeah.
always crucial to be critical and seek out diverse perspectives.
All right, let's take a break here. We've covered a ton of ground, from the potential end of the Ukraine war to the rise of Bitcoin and this whole idea of a global power shift. When we get back, we'll dig deeper into Nutstuff's specific investment recommendations and see how these global trends could impact your portfolio.
Disclaimer. North Breach Limited, Nutstuff trading name, is an appointed representative of Messels Limited, which is authorized and regulated by the Financial Conduct Authority. Nutstuff has made every reasonable effort to ensure the information provided in this communication is correct. But Nutstuff makes no representation nor any warranty as to whether the information is accurate, complete, or up to date. To the extent permitted by law, Nutstuff accepts no responsibility for any errors or misstatements, negligent or otherwise. Nutstuff, its associates, officers, or employees may also have interests in the financial instruments referred to in this information by acting in various roles. The information in this media is confidential. If you are not the intended recipient, you are not authorized to use the information in this media in any way. Nutstuff does not guarantee the integrity of any media or attached files. The view or opinions expressed are the author's own and may not reflect the view or opinions of Nutstuff. Electronic communications carried within the Nutstuff system may be monitored.
Welcome back. It feels like Nutstuff has already given us a ton to think about, and we're just getting started.
I know, right? It's like drinking from a fire hose.
Yeah.
But that's what makes these deep dives so interesting. We're not just skimming the surface here. We're really trying to get to the bottom of what's driving the world.
And Nutstuff definitely isn't shy about throwing out some really bold predictions. Like their whole take on Bitcoin, for example.
Yeah.
It's not just an investment to them. It's like a whole revolution in the making.
Right. Remember that whole thing about the Trump administration creating a strategic Bitcoin reserve? They see that as a huge turning point, like a sign that governments are finally realizing that digital assets are like the real deal.
Exactly. They're calling it a policy shift. Like,
Huh.
the floodgates are open now for all the big institutions to get into the crypto game. They think it could be the thing that finally pushes Bitcoin from, like, this niche thing on the fringes of finance to the mainstream.
And it's not just about, the price of Bitcoin going up. Nutstuff
Yeah.
sees this as a validation of the whole, like, underlying technology, the blockchain. They think it could totally change everything, from how we handle money to energy to even, like, governance.
Yeah, they're really excited about this tokenized energy thing.
Mhm.
Basically, it's using blockchain technology to track and trade energy units.
Yeah.
Like a way to make energy production and distribution more decentralized. Could make it way more efficient and accessible.
Wait, so you're saying instead of relying on, like, these big energy companies, we could potentially buy and sell energy directly from each other using blockchain? That's pretty wild.
Yeah, it's a radical idea, but Nutstuff thinks it could revolutionize the whole energy sector. They see it as part of this bigger trend towards decentralization, like moving away from these big centralized institutions and towards these more distributed systems.
It's like they're saying the future is all about cutting out the middleman, whether it's banks, governments, or energy companies.
Exactly. And they're basically telling investors to get on board with this trend. Invest in Bitcoin, of course, but also in companies like Helium. They're building a decentralized wireless network, and Coinbase, that big cryptocurrency exchange.
So it sounds like Nutstuff is betting big on the future of blockchain. But they're not ignoring the risks, right? Like, the crypto market can be pretty crazy.
Oh, yeah, they know it's volatile. They even admit that the market is in what they call a mid-bull pullback right now. Basically, a little dip in a bigger upward trend. They're saying investors should stay calm, maybe even buy more if they can handle the risk, and just ride out the storm.
So patience and a long-term view are key, especially when it comes to crypto.
Totally. They say it's all about not getting caught up in the hype and focusing on the core value. They think the true potential of blockchain will become clear over time as more and more people start using it.
It's interesting how Nutstuff connects all these, like, seemingly random trends. The end of the Ukraine war, the rise of Bitcoin, the shift in global power. They seem to see it all as part of this bigger story, a story about disruption and change.
Yeah, it's like they're connecting the dots and showing us this bigger picture that most people miss. And whether you agree with them or not, they definitely make you think about the world in a new way.
Okay, so we've talked about their big picture ideas, but what about their actual investment recommendations? Like, where do they see the best opportunities in this, like, new world order?
Well, we already talked about how they're bullish on European defense stocks, Chinese tech giants, and those companies involved in the mineral deal with Ukraine. But they also have some, more under-the-radar picks.
Ooh, like what? Spill the beans.
Okay, so for example, they're recommending offshore drilling companies like Noble, Valaris, and Seadrill. They think those companies are undervalued and that they'll benefit from the growing demand for oil and gas.
Interesting. So even though they're really into tokenized energy and renewables, they still think there's a place for, like, the old school energy sources in the short term.
Seems like it. It's not that they want to ditch fossil fuels completely. More like they see a gradual shift to a more sustainable energy mix happening.
Right, that makes sense.
Yeah.
The world probably can't just switch to all renewable energy overnight.
Exactly. And while that transition is happening, companies involved in traditional energy production could still be a good investment.
Got it. What else is Nutstuff keeping an eye on?
They're also recommending a company called Greggs. It's a bakery chain in the UK.
Wait, a bakery chain? That seems kind of random compared to their other picks.
Yeah, but there's a catch. They're recommending it as a short opportunity.
A short opportunity. What does that even mean?
It means they think the company's stock price is going to go down. They think Greggs is facing a lot of competition and that they're maybe moving too far away from what they're known for.
So they're basically betting against the bakery.
Kind of, yeah. Short selling is a risky move, but it's one Nutstuff seems comfortable with.
Definitely not for the average investor.
Right. And it's important to remember that Nutstuff's recommendations are just that, recommendations. You should always do your own research before you invest and make decisions that are right for you and your risk tolerance.
For sure.
Well,
We're not giving financial advice here, just exploring what Nutstuff has to say about the markets.
right, just sharing their perspective. And it's important to remember that Nutstuff isn't always right.
No one is.
Exactly. But even when they get things wrong, their analysis is still interesting and often highlights trends that other people miss.
Yeah, they make you think, and that's always a good thing. Okay, so we've talked about their bullish picks, but they also have some warnings for investors, right? They seem especially worried about Apple.
Yeah, they're saying that Apple is wasting shareholder money on buybacks and that their cash position has been going down.
So even though Apple is doing well right now, Nutstuff thinks there might be trouble ahead.
That's what they're suggesting. They think Apple might face some challenges in the future, and they're warning investors not to get too comfortable.
It's always good to hear a different perspective, even if it's about a company everyone loves like Apple. Reminds us that no investment is totally safe.
Totally. Diversification is important. Don't put all your eggs in one basket, no matter how good that basket looks.
So Nutstuff's recommending a mix of caution and, like, boldness. Invest in the future, but don't forget about the present. Be open to change, but be ready for bumps along the way.
It's a tough balance, but it seems to be working for them. They're always adjusting their strategies based on what they see happening in the world. And even if you don't agree with their specific picks, there's a lot we can learn from their approach.
Now, beyond just companies, Nutstuff also has some interesting things to say about the US and the UK. They're pointing out the big difference in income between the two countries, like even the poorest US state has a higher median income than the UK.
Yeah, it shows that even developed countries have their problems and that not everyone benefits equally.
They also talk about all the fraud happening in the US Social Security system and suggest that there might be similar problems in the UK's National Health Service.
It's a critique of big government bureaucracy and how inefficient these huge social programs can be.
Nutstuff also criticizes the UK government's decision to go ahead with the Chagos Islands deal. The one where they're giving control of the islands to Mauritius, even though the Chagosian people have a claim to them.
Yeah, they question where the UK's priorities are, pointing out that there's not enough money for public services, but billions are available for defense and foreign aid.
It's a good reminder that political decisions aren't always logical or fair, and that sometimes powerful people can get what they want, even if it hurts regular people.
Exactly. We have to be aware of that and hold our leaders accountable.
So Nutstuff is looking at more than just money and the economy. They're talking about social issues, political decisions, and the big forces shaping the world.
It's like they have a more holistic view, recognizing that everything's connected and you can't understand one part of the world without looking at the others.
It's a good reminder that investing isn't just about numbers and charts. It's about understanding the world around us and making smart choices based on that understanding.
It's about seeing the big picture and understanding the trends that are shaping the future.
All right, let's pause here for a second. When we come back, we'll wrap up our deep dive into Nutstuff, looking at their final thoughts and what they think it all means for investors like you. Welcome back. We've been through a lot with Nutstuff today, from the Ukraine war ending to Bitcoin going big, and even some specific companies they think are worth watching.
Yeah, they definitely gave us a lot to chew on. It's clear they see things a little differently, and that's what makes their analysis so interesting.
Totally. Remember how they ended their report?
Yeah.
They said something about the word Trump has multiple meanings, one of which refers to a playing card that outranks all others.
Yeah, it's a bit cryptic, but I think what they're getting at is this idea of disruption, like challenging the way things are.
Right. Like someone or something is coming in to shake everything up, to turn the whole system upside down. And they seem to think Trump, the actual person, might be that disruptor.
It's a bold statement, for sure, but it fits with their whole idea of the world changing, the old rules not mattering anymore.
So what does it all mean for us, for regular investors? What's the big takeaway from everything Nutstuff is saying?
Well, I think the main message is to be flexible, to be open to new ideas, and to be willing to question what you think you know. The world is moving fast, and if you're stuck in the past, you might miss out.
It's like they're saying, don't be afraid to think outside the box, to challenge the experts, and to explore opportunities that others might overlook.
Exactly. And it's not just about investing, it's about life in general. Be curious, be skeptical, and be ready for anything.
I like that. It's easy to get caught up in the day-to-day and forget to look at the bigger picture. Nutstuff reminds us to step back, see the whole board, and understand the forces that are shaping the future.
And they don't just give us vague advice. They actually point to specific companies, sectors, and even countries that they think will benefit from these changes.
Right. They're giving us real-world examples, showing us how these global trends are actually playing out.
And even if they're not always right with their picks, They force us to think for ourselves and do our own homework. They're not giving us all the answers. They're challenging us to find our own.
It's like they're saying, don't just follow the crowd. Do your own research and make decisions based on what you believe.
Exactly. Blindly trusting anyone, even Nutstuff, can be risky. It's important to understand the market and make choices that fit your own goals and comfort level.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into Nutstuff's world, I think the big lesson is this. The world is always changing, and the only thing that's certain is that things will keep changing.
And the best way to deal with that is to stay informed, be flexible, and be open to new things.
Nutstuff gave us a lot to think about. And even if we don't agree with everything they say, they definitely made us see the world differently.
And that's always a good thing, no matter what happens in the markets.
So keep learning, keep exploring, and as always, happy investing.